So, good afternoon, good evening, everyone. I see that you're joining in from the waiting room where we have you waiting every time. If it's your first time, this is a webinar. It's not a Zoom call. So if you don't see the window, do not worry. No problem if you don't use your microphone. It's just a webinar. And you will see the speaker, the panelist. I will introduce her in a minute. And the other two windows is the interpretation, since this talk will be translated. Daniela speaks Spanish, but this is translated into English for those who prefer it. What I'd like you is to choose your channel. So go to interpretation and there choose your channel, whether Spanish or English. Just pick the channel that suits your needs. Even though this is in Spanish, if you need Spanish, please choose that channel. That way the sound you get will be better. And so if it is okay with you, we'll wait for 2 more minutes. 2 more minutes so that everyone joins in. Since we had you in the waiting room, just let me give you some more minutes so that you can all be part of this webinar. We have a lot of people, naturally, since this is a very interesting talk. So, Daniela, can we wait 2 more minutes? Yes, of course. And then we go right into the proper introduction and the talk as well. So choose channel you want to listen to. I'll go into the chat to see if someone's requesting something. If there are questions or comments. Good.
Vamos a dar un par de minutos, que sí que me habían comunicado algunas familias.
We are waiting 2 more minutes. Some families had already warned me that it would be a tight schedule. We know that it's always bad timing. If it is later, then it's bedtime in Spain. And if it's a bit sooner than that, it'll be some kind of extracurricular activity or working hours. We know it's never the perfect fit, but we hope this is the best for most of us. So let's give you a couple more minutes.
Bueno, pues yo creo que...
Fine. I guess we can get started with this wonderful talk that we have for today. Good afternoon, good evening. For those of you on either side of the Atlantic, we know there are families from Latin America and some from the United States. Welcome to this talk. As you know, this is part of the ASDD Expert series. As usual, it's been over 2 years now that we've been with this project, but it's all about becoming experts, a bit more of an expert with every talk we listen to. So these are ASDD experts, you families, but also for healthcare professionals. We know there are healthcare professionals that join us for this series. And this gets even better because this is October. As you all know, October is a bit more meaningful for the community we represent, which is the community of people with achondroplasia and other skeletal dysplasias with dwarfism is awareness raising month. We say that every month is October and every month should be October. But if we are to focus on a specific month, well, years ago, this campaign was started in October, was started specifically the 25th, and this talk is actually part of this ASDDD series, but also as part of the awareness raising month for people with ASDD. And I think this is the best talk we could think of for this month. It is given a chance to a company such as QED Therapeutics, small company as part of a larger companies, which is BridgeBio, and it's a chance they have to give you a presentation, a talk on the study and the clinical trial they're developing for ACH. They've completed phase 2, they're starting phase 3, and Daniela will explain later in detail. But in Spain, we're lucky and privileged enough to be part of the clinical trial from the very beginning, from square one, from that observational, the natural life story, the natural history study. So we've kept up to date with the development of the trial itself. And then the QED Therapeutics company is amazing when it comes to perspective, what they call patients, what we call families, but they've always given families a chance to speak up, to say what they need, what their children need for a proper clinical trial. What do we need to be studied? What's having the greatest impact in the daily life? And so questions asked from the preclinical phase, when they were already working with mice, they were already asking what is to be studied and why. What doesn't kid and family need to be studied, explored, to improve, to actually improve their quality of life? Why would we stop here when we can actually think of what truly has an impact on their lives from the minute they get out of bed till they go back to bed again? And we're often your voice of all the people in this call, and all those questions we've been asked from the beginning. And so I think the success, it's not a matter of luck. Yes, there's some surprise to it, but success is the result of an interest or concern. So there is some ACH mouse or this molecule or lab or drug, but there is a child there, is a family there, and it all has an impact on their lives. So let's find out what that is, what's behind it all, and let's try and make what matters happen. And this is the best definition that we at Alpi can give for QED Therapeutics and the team. Now we see Daniela Rogoff with us. She is the Senior Vice President for Clinical Development at QED. She is a children's endocrinologist, started with QED in 2009, but she's the head and voice. And let me assure you that she's got a wonderful team, hard-working team, and always on the same page, because all the perspectives, all the points of view matter and are shared. And from there, they developed all studies regarding achondroplasia. This summer, we saw that in the flesh, we were invited by the company to get to know the bases or the headquarters in San Francisco. We got to meet their team to talk about this all. So it's a chance not just to talk to them, but all of their team, maybe a bit more technical, but they listened to what we had to say about what it means to have ACH for the child and the family alike. So we're so grateful to this company for giving us the opportunity, and thankful because they count on Alpi for developing and explaining their studies, not just to us. Well, yes, we're always in touch, but actually those who matter, which is you, families in their daily lives who need to know. And as we say with the project, it's all about becoming experts about our children's lives. So Daniela is the medical director, and she is very talented. woman, but she's a friend. She's been to all our conferences, hasn't missed one. Actually, with all the talks that we put together, she's there as well because she wants to learn. She wants to know what's out there to be able to help. So on behalf of Alpi, thank you for being with us. Thank you and your team. And here we are, willing to listen to you and take good note. Just let me tell you, this is a webinar, so there's no option to raise your hand or open your microphone, but you can type your questions. There is this questions and answers button. You can type your questions there, and then I will read them out loud and have a Q&A after her talk or her presentation, which I think is great that we get to ask. We get to ask as long as you have an answer, but it's good that we get to ask you questions as families of a person with ACH who could be part of the trial, or maybe, hopefully in the future will be given the drug. Thank you very much, Susanna. Thank you to the Alpi family. It's actually an honor for me to be with you. As Susanna said, I feel I am part of the beautiful Alpi family, and I love it that I'm part of all these meetings, which I guess is the best way. We all have to learn, we all have to get to know, and for me, it's a way to keep up to date and informed about what we are trying to do with our drug. As Susanna said, this is all about children, families, so it is good to stay in constant touch and connected to reality. It is so important so that we can focus our efforts on what really matters and what's actually worth it and can be worth it for children and families. Thank you, Susanna, for your brief introduction of QED. I think it shows how we've tried to work and how we focus on our work on a daily basis. As I usually say, it's not so much work as it is something that we do just because we want to help and do things the best possible way. And of course, we want to do things scientifically, but what's most important is also keeping children and families in mind. So thank you very much for the opportunity. First, I'd like to highlight that the safety and efficacy of infigratibnib in skeletal dysplasias has not been proven, and it has not been approved by any of the health authorities as described here. It is important to keep that in mind. So first, before going to the outcomes and the preliminary result of the phase 2 study, here we have a short intro, who we are, BridgeBio and QED. BridgeBio is a pharmaceutical company that develops new treatments for genetically rare genetic conditions. We want to discover, develop, test, and offer transforming drugs for the treatment of people who live with genetic conditions or cancers that have clear genetic indicators. QED Therapeutics is one of the subsidiaries of BridgeBio, located in California, same as BridgeBio, founded in 2018, has around 50 employees, and it is much focused on the development of infigratibnib for conditions caused by changes in the fibroblast growth factor, the FGFR, in cases such as achondroplasia. And here you have a picture of the whole team. Well, here I'd like to show to you how BridgeBio has many molecules in the pipeline, all being developed for rare conditions. This is the main goal we have, giving answers to conditions that have medical need, but do not have any drugs available. Here you can see all the different molecules that are being developed by BridgeBio. And the model we follow is for every molecule, there's a sub-company. So QED is for FGFR. The idea is to centralize development and focus effort of the team for the development of the molecule for that given condition, so that the clinical development is as quick as possible and as right as possible, so that the drug can potentially reach people who live with rare genetic conditions as soon as possible. So the question is, what's infigratibnib? Infigratibnib is the drug that QED is developing as we speak for ACH and other skeletal dysplasias. Infigratibnib is now in research and works on the fibroblastic growth receptors. It has been developed to bring down the signaling of receptors inside cells, and it is administered orally. It's taken orally, it's a very small tablet, so that it's easy for children to swallow. And here you can see the different sizes, different tablets, and you see the one with the orange arrow, that's the one showing the size of infigratibnib. So how would that work inside the cells? Well, as we know, ACH is the result of a variant in the FGFR3, which is a growth factor receptor, which is constantly triggered. And once triggered, it works as an inhibitor of growth in the growth plate cells inside the bone. So for conditions such as ACH, where the receptor is constantly triggered and active, bone growth is slower and atypical. With infigratibnib, well, it has been developed to bring down the overactivation of the receptor, and we hope that will help bring down the response signaling in response to the receptor activation that sends the information that the receptor is inside the cells where the effect takes place. The idea is that this infigratibnib has direct impact on the receptor, bringing down overactivity, would then bring down the overactivation of all the signal pathways triggered and opened by the receptor. So the initial scenario is that by reducing hyperactivity, there would be a better balance between proliferation and differentiation of growth plate cells that would in turn lead to an uninhibited growth, bone growth that would be more regular. So our program from the clinical side, once we had all preclinical data reporting that infigratibnib had the potential to bring benefits to children with ACH, that's when we started developing our program and we started the clinical trials. As Susanna said, we started with an observational PROPEL study. With the PROPEL study, all the children in the program, they need to be recruited there. 6 months of observation. That's what's required as part of this study. That type of observation was not just about growth. Of course, we take measurements, and we assess initial or baseline growth before treatment, but we also look for that baseline information before all kinds of interventions to see any kind of complications regarding ACH, also quality of life. There are many observations that will then, during phase 2, phase 3 studies, and mainly the open long-term study, will help us see if Infigratibnib has the potential to relieve any of the ACH-related complications. So PROPEL is the first one that we started. Then we had the phase 2 study, which is the study was designed to test different types of doses of Infigratibnib so that we would choose the most effective and the safest dose that could be then taken on to phase 3 study. That was the first part, which is dose escalation phase 2 study. That's 6 months just completed. We've got preliminary results, and we've chosen a dose so that we can move on to phase 3. There were 5 cohorts with growing doses, starting with very low doses. It was the first time it was being used for children, so we started with very low doses. And once we proved there was no safety risk identified, dose was escalated. For every escalation, there was a group of experts also checking all safety data just to make sure that the doses could be escalated further. Escalated all to the highest, that was cohort 5, that was 0.25 milligram per kilo per day. Baseline or starting doses was 0.016. So for every cohort, there was a doubling of the previous dose. I will briefly mention what the endpoints of the study. And I'd say for the data, once we had recruited all children, and once they've been 6 months under treatment and follow-up with safety and efficacy solutions, with all the children at least 6 months with the study, that's where we had an endpoint analyzed with the data to see the different results from different cohorts so that we could decide which cohort was the one that would seem to be more efficacious without compromising safety. And these are the results that I bring to you today. There is another study that has been conducted in different sites, which is the long-term open extension study, open label study. It's important because that's where children who had previous treatment, there is a cohort of children who have not been on Infigratibnib but could benefit from it, because we want all children that are in that long-term study get the Infigratibnib treatment till they complete treatment and they reach maturity. We find this is key, since this is where we will potentially look into the potential benefit that Infigratibnib could have for children. for endpoints other than stature. As we know, there are also complications, changes in quality of life, or all that has to do with health and quality of life. This will take much longer than a short phase 2, phase 3 study. And since it will take us longer, the open label extension study is the one that will give us the answers. So this is what we want to do, to continue with the study until all children recruited can complete their growth. So, Propel 2 results. This is a phase 2 study, and these are the preliminary studies results of the escalation phase. All 5 doses were assessed, but I will focus on cohort 5, the last one, and that's the dose that has been chosen for the phase 3 study. I'm talking about preliminary data here because it's an ongoing study. Children are still under treatment and in observation with all types of efficacy and safety measures, so they will stay longer, and there is then the confirmation phase at the end of this one. But the main goal of the data analysis performed after 6 months would be to have a preliminary assessment of results so that the program can go on and continue and move on to phase 3. At the point of data cut for Propel 2, there were 72 children enrolled. Out of those 72, 4 had prematurely discontinued. 3 was because of family's decision. They decided to withdraw their consent for personal reason because following up the protocol was too difficult for them, and decided that a clinical trial was not the best way to deal for the family. Another child who discontinued was because he would need a procedure that was not allowed for the study. Of the remaining children at the data cut point, 39 had completed the study. You saw how the dose was escalated. So the kids with the lower doses had already completed the study by the time the children in cohort 5 made 5 months with the study. There were 39 children, and they all decided to continue with the open label extension study, which is, as I said, long term. As part of demographic data, so that you get an idea of all the children, there were a few more girls than boys. Enrollment age average was 7.5, range was 3.1 to 11.5 years. Most of the children were under 8, followed by those over 8 years of age. Let me just say that during the phase 2 study, we had an inclusion criteria of up to 11. That was the maximum age for the enrollment. There are some demographic data on screen collected in countries where these data can be allowed. I'm talking here about race and genetic background. So, preliminary results. The main endpoint or measurement for this study had to be measurable within a short period of time. That was the change in growth velocity compared to baseline value. The baseline velocity was calculated, estimated with the children that were recruited for Propel 2, for Propel. So that's where we got the data before they were moved to Propel 2 and were started on Infigratibnib. This is a primary endpoint, and we see a change compared to baseline velocity, growth velocity. So it's annualized height velocity using a 6-month period. And we noted a dose-response relationship for the lowest doses. You see them there. This is a graphic representation so that it's easier. Cohorts 1, 2, and 3 was a non-significant response. Cohort 4 showed an improvement or an increase in responders. These are children over 5, by the way. And cohort 5 showed a much more significant change compared to previous doses. For cohort 5, the growth compared to baseline, annualized and estimated from the 6 months of treatment, was a 3.38 centimeter increase per year. This was the average growth observed. And so if we check out the growth velocity per se, the annualized growth velocity, not the change itself, but the velocity, absolute velocity, the average within 6 months was 6.9 centimeters per year, where the median was almost 7.6. So cohort 5 and its dosage led to a significant increase compared to baseline for velocity. And so we also tried and see how children were responding. We thought it was important to see if there was a positive change when it came to growth velocity. We wanted to see how many children had a change where we would be confident that the variation observed was actually due to treatment and not just slight changes in measurement or growth as could be observed without an intervention. And so we had this random cut. So a change in the baseline growth velocity of at least 25%, so that we are certain these are real changes that were due to Infigratibnib. As you all know, growth can be variable, it's not linear, and there are small growth variations or even measurement variations, which means that results can also have variations. But we wanted to be sure that we were certain that these results were a response to treatment. And so we decided to have this 25% increase in growth velocity, at least 25%, so that we be confident that children were responding to treatment. And just by assessing the amount of children whose growth velocity was increased at least 25% compared to baseline, we realized that the number of children that met the criterion was increasing as the dose was increased, and 80% of children showed that criteria or met that criterion of increased growth velocity. And so with the average change just for cohort 5 and those children who met the criterion so that they could be classified as responders, we realized it was 4.08 centimeters per year compared to baseline velocity, and the median was 4.14. I know there's been question or misunderstandings why this value, why responders or those who maybe didn't have a significant response based on our criteria. We also think this is important because a 0.1% change for a child who's growing at 4 centimeters per year, having a 0.1% increase, well, it's difficult to know whether it is due to treatment or just variations in the child's growth or maybe changes in measurements. And this is why we decided to do this different special analysis that helps us be certain that the drug is actually working or not. This other assessment was other parameters that are also important, such as changes in what's known as Z-score for stature in the growth curves for ACH or children with standard stature, average stature. And for those children who were on Infigratibnib cohort 5, there was an increase in the Z-score that was 0.29 compared to baseline for growth curve. This was highly significant, statistically significant, and it was proven, as we were saying, changes in growth velocity, changes regarding where the child is compared to the general population. And one of the most important questions we need to assess, or endpoints, is proportionality. We analyze the proportionality of the upper limbs and lower limbs. And for cohort 1 to 3, there were no changes in proportionality. Cohort 4 had a negative change where the lower segment might be growing faster than the upper half. That was a trend, but minimum. Still, for those children in cohort 5, the change what was much more significant. These are preliminary results, so just positivity. But what it shows that there was no worsening in proportionality, which is important, and it would also seem there is a trend towards improving proportionality, but we need more data. This is a small group of children, so it has to be confirmed as all the other data that I'm sharing that has to be confirmed, have to be confirmed in the phase 3 study. These are the individual results for all the children that are in cohort 5. And what you can see is that most children experience a significant change in growth velocity. Here we have annualized velocity. Gray shows baseline, so starting point. Then green is as estimated 6 months after treatment. or in treatment rather. Most of the children that were part of the analysis had a significant increase in growth velocity, that was 10, but there were 2 did not meet that 25% increase criterion compared to baseline. And we tried and see if there's any feature that would indicate why or suggest why these children didn't respond as other children. There was nothing obvious, but of course, we also need the phase 3 study where there will be many more children enrolled. And so we would have a proper analysis, not just based on 2 children, but larger groups to try and see if there are differences that can be predicted in the way that children respond individually. You might also know that every child is different in the way they will respond as with anything else. So what we are measuring is growth velocity. So they stay within the studies, and we will have an in-depth analysis in the future to see what changes they have, all these children, those who responded by over 25% or under 25%. I'm talking about, again, growth velocity. So there's this other item that we analyzed and researched that was collagen 10. As you probably know, collagen 10 is synthesized and deposited in the growth plate, and it's a wonderful indicator that you get from blood samples, and it shows the activity, how active the growth plate is. We tried to see what were the differences in this biomarker, collagen 10, for different doses. And we saw, this is what you see here. This is the percentage of increase in the biomarker level compared to baseline visit. So collagen 10 levels at baseline. And you see there's also dose response dose, sorry. That's collagen 10 in month 3 and similar month 6, which is 23%. This is a confirmation that this biomarker, which is a blood biomarker, but it shows the growth plate activity. So it would confirm that the results we have seen in our measurements were correlated to biomarkers can be tested in blood. That is a very objective biomarker to confirm that changes we measure for growth seem to be real. So this is all about efficacy, but what about safety? As I said, cohort 5 is the one that was most efficacious, and we wanted to study its safety to see if this dose can be moved on to phase 3. Children in cohort 5 did not have severe adverse events that would be drug-related. Most of those adverse events were grade 1 or 2, which are minimum or moderate. There were no adverse events that would require dose reduction. There was an in-depth analysis. They are all examined by ophthalmologists as well to see if there are any eye issues. These safety controls were comparing baseline and exams in adults with some types of cancers and doses that were up to 10 times higher than the ones used for ACH. Even though these type of adverse events are not expected for smaller doses and younger kids, we were still told what had to be looked into. And we examined up close to see there were no adverse events. I insist there are no eye adverse events in cohort 5. There was no hyperphosphatemia. Also, there was no bone aging or worsening of proportionality. As I said, most adverse events were grade 1 or 2, and 58% were grade 1, and almost 35% grade 2. 4 children had grade 3 adverse events, which were not drug related. You can also see the type of adverse events submitted, and these were reported by over 10% of children, and these are common childhood occurrences, and also for children with ACH, of course. But most of them were grade 1 and 2, and these are common conditions for children. I'll give you just a minute so that you can read what's on screen. And with these results, phase 2 study, that's where we saw that those from cohort 5, which is 0.25 per kilo per day, and that's the dose that gives the best efficacy, the highest efficacy and safety, or so it seems. And I like to insist these are all preliminary data because have not been confirmed with this phase 3 study. And I really want to be very clear about it. But this is what helps us move on to phase 3. Once we had these results, we could start with the next steps for phase 3 with this indication. We submitted all the paperwork with feedback from the FDA and the European Medicine Agency, and we shared our data and our plans to study the efficacy and safety of Infigratibnib for children in a phase 3 study. And both FDA and EMA agreed on the phase 3 study design. It's a double-blind, randomized design where some children will get the drug or placebo, but the rate is for every 2 children on the drug, 1 will get placebo. It's a 2-to-1 ratio. It will last for a year, And with that, we hope we can file the request for the drug approval. The main endpoint would be the changes in growth velocity, annualized growth velocity for 12 months compared to baseline. And we have also secondary endpoints regarding changes in proportionality, stature with a Z-score, comparing tables of children with ACH and children with average stature. And we, as part of the program, we also try and see the impact in clinical complications, and we're talking about changes in the frequency or rate of complications, severity of skeletal changes, or quality of life. There are many assessments being made from PROPEL 2. It will be maintained in PROPEL 3 in the next trial. In our interactions with the healthcare authorities, well, that opened the way for the trial, phase 3 trial that will be started by the end of this year. Outcome or conclusions: the safety and efficacy of the oral dose once a day of Infigratibnib, which will be 0.25 milligrams per kilo per day, will be examined and explored in greater depth in a phase 3 study. The enrollment to the observational study is open and is actively enrolling, recruiting, and PROPEL 3 will be started by the end of 2023. Before opening for questions, I would like to thank all the children, all the families, all advocates of patients, advocacy groups for patients, groups of parents and families, and groups such as Alpe Foundation, because they are always there helping us out as part of the process. Thank you, and if there are questions, here I am. Thank you so very much, Daniela. As usual, has been a very clear talk, as we always expect from you, experts such as you in the clinical field or the medical field as you. We want plain language, an understandable explanation, because it's not the same when you're talking to other clinicians or drug companies, but you are very clear on who is listening to you here. So thank you, because your explanations are always very understandable language, content, explanation, and clarification of every slide. There's technical content, of course, but even the content of it, the technical content is clear. As usual, I have questions of my own. I always ask them, but there are always more and more. And we also have some other questions that I got directly or on the chat. Let me read through the chat. Okay. You had not concluded, but when is the end of the last phase? That was the question. Phase, I would understand, is phase 3. Well, yes. The plans for the completion, well, it depends very much on how much progress it's made with the studies. It's difficult to give you a specific date, but we are recruiting for observational studies so that when the phase 3 study is open, children have already been 6 months with the observational study, and so they can quickly move on to phase 3. So that's why we are enrolling phase 3 in advance. Yes, dates vary because it needs sites activated. We have experience and we brought them here to Spain, but then site has to be activated and then ethical committees and everything has to be controlled, under control. So we always talk about approximate dates. They can start with Propel because it's been open, it's an observational study, but the specific date for the drug and placebo study, well, it will be dependent on the sites participating. Yes, every site. Let me rephrase it. The study to be started has to be approved by a number of entities, healthcare authorities, ethics committees, groups within the hospital or institution, and it takes time. But the idea is that while that is happening, while that could happen, children could be with Propel so that once it's approved and the site open, they can be quickly transferred. But thank you for the question. It's important. It's not that children complete 6 months and they start. The study has to be approved and the site open and approved as well for phase 3 studies. Actually, there are some sites that are waiting to have it active so that they enroll the children for those first 6 months. So there are differences in methodology and also resources and investigators. I always clear about it because we are always excited, expecting for it to start and work and give us results. But this side is someone, this side is doing, and we compare, but it always takes time and organization. So we can give approximate dates, even for different countries. And as part of that, we need to understand that there is a range. Same as with enrollment or recruitment. It is a question that we want to be clear. For phase 3, there is a new enrollment open. There are children who would start just for that phase. You do not use, okay, let me say use, but you don't reuse children from previous studies. Yeah, that's right. So the way we approached the enrollment for Propel was, we're kind of waves. Children who were part of this phase 2 study were enrolled first, and now that we were approaching the phase 3, that's where we started recruiting new children that would be part of the phase 3 study. The goal was for every child with Propel or Propel can go to an interventional study if they decide they want to participate. So that's why it was not all of them together, but kinds of waves, so that we could be sure that there was a chance to offer spot so that they could have the screening in interventional studies if that's what the family decides. That's right. There are new children starting on Propel and then moving on to phase 3. Once they start with that placebo drug, it's 1 year. It has to be 1 year from the moment phase 3 is started. And for every site, there will be a starting date. But what we know for sure, that once they started on the drug with the 2-to-1 ratio, it'll be 1 year for phase 3, both placebo and drug. Yes, that's right. Once they get the first dose, it's 52 weeks, that's a year. On treatment, 2 out of 3 will get active treatment and 1 of 3 placebo. No one will know who's who. That's a double blind. Researchers, or sponsors or family, no one will know who's getting what, so that we can truly interpret results without a bias. Yes, that's my question. We know, but explain what randomized and double-blind means for everyone in the room. No one knows who gets placebo and who gets drug. Yes, yes. Exactly. And the distribution, well, distribution is done by a computer, an algorithm. This buzzword, no, algorithms, yes, algorithm will decide who gets placebo and who gets the drug. Nobody knows. Nobody knows. So, good afternoon. I'd like to know if a child on Voxzogo can be moved to this orally administered drug. Alejandra, this is your name. Do you mean trial or once the drug is available in the market? Maybe this question has to be qualified to get you a good answer. If it is a trial that you're mentioning, what would be the answer, Daniela? Those kids who've been on Voxzogo or some other drug, which is in development for ACH, cannot be part of the phase 3 study, since it could be difficult to interpret results. So in order to ensure that we get the study and clear results, those children are not eligible. They are eligible if they were on the drug for under 1 month, and that was over before, several months before joining Propel. But for the phase 3 study, children on drugs previously cannot participate. But Alejandra, if the question is once in the near future the drug is available, that's yes, when I see after time, so that you get rid of the drug from your body, that's when you can change. Because it has happened the other way around. There were children that were part of a clinical trial on the drug, and once Voxzogo has been approved, when it was out in the market, and it was the same premise. Once you've proven that there is no drug in your body, in your organism, then you can start on a new drugs, a new treatment. Yes, exactly. And this will be managed by the prescribing doctor. It's a decision taken together with the family. They will jointly decide when and how to swap. But for phase 3 study, unfortunately, the answer is no. What about the estimated date of approval for the drug? Well, so many screening, and even if everything goes well, then it's about collecting results and having them approved and then putting them in a dossier. And that's all about regulatory agencies, and then the agencies into different countries, and then the wonderful world of knowing who's paying for it. So I don't know whether there is an answer for this question. What do you think, Daniela? Well, actually, I cannot give you an estimation of when this will be available or approved. It's way too early for us to give you an estimated date. We at the ASDT Colombian Foundation, we work together, closely together, And so it's not just the Colombian organization, but we also work with other organizations in Latin America and Europe. But is our country, they ask, included in phase 3 study? And I'm asking about Colombia. And if not, if you know, do you know where it will be developed? As of now, what we can say is the countries where Propel and Propel 2 are being developed will remain in the study. We are enlarging the number, expanding the number for phase 3. And I would like to be cautious before we name new countries. And it is just a matter of being cautious because it has not been approved for some of those places, or it's being reviewed, and then Propel 2 has to be reviewed as well. So I would like to be cautious when naming the countries where this will be developed, but it's been said the Propel is opening in new Latin American regions. We are trying to start in Argentina and other countries as well in Europe. So these are the new countries we are assessing, but we need to be careful, very cautious. There are countries where Propel has not been approved, so it's difficult to confirm where all studies will be developed. Yes, it's a matter of managing expectations. I would say, yes, we need to be cautious about it. QED, on its website, they are very transparent. And if not, all news, you know that ALPE Foundation is not just for Spain, but it's international work, global work. So any type of global news that we have, we also post it and share it. So if we get information, you will know. And once there are new sites opening, different sites and countries, that information will be posted in clinicaltrial.gov, and there we will say where the different studies will be conducted, which countries. But again, I want to be very cautious until we are sure it is approved, and so that there are not misunderstandings and expectations or anything like that. Thank you, Daniela. The dose with best results is the highest, but have you considered a higher one? And what about phase 3 number of participants, if you can share? Well, the highest dose with the very positive results we got, the safety data, we think that the potential benefit of these preliminary results, well, this can be significant for children with ACH, and so exploring a higher dose was not justified. When seeing the balance between response and safety, we wanted to be sure that decisions are based on the complete analysis of the response. So we chose dose 5 because a higher dose at this point was not considered necessary. What about the other questions? Do you know how many children would be recruited for phase 3? Actually, this is still being projected, has not been submitted. We don't have the documents yet finalized, have not been made public. So I rather not comment some of those details, but they will be made public. And all these data will be included, such as the clinicaltrial.gov, and we will be talking to ALPI Foundation so that you have the data on the phase 3 studies. So what age is, what's the oldest age, or when does the medication end, at what age? So the drug, and in the open label extension, well, it will be administered until the final stature. Final stature is when they've completed almost their whole growth, as defined in our studies as when the growth velocity has gone down under the common growth for children with ACH. And when it stays at that velocity for some time, and also puberty, when the child is physically mature, when everything indicates that they are completing puberty and are reaching their final stature. Age, well, depends on the child. All children complete their growth when they complete it. So that's why there's not a specific number regarding age. It will depend on the starting age and also the maturity age. And that is when growth plate is closed, ossified, and there's no more growth potential. And that's very individual. Any type of objective data, such as, I don't know, Tanner score or growth plate closure, because saying pre-puberty or puberty, anything objective, so they get there when they get there, but any type of objective piece of data so that parents know this is the end, so I can trust this is the end, that's reached the maximum growth. Yes, that would be velocity under 1.5 centimeters per year, and Tanner would be 4 or 5. So both conditions need to converge, indicating that puberty has almost been completed or completed, and that the child's growth velocity is slower, and so the potential benefit is very low. What about the extension phase? You're talking about phase 3, but you mentioned extension phase. Well, this is one of my questions as well, but what is this extension phase about? Who would participate? Who is participating? There's no placebo. I think it is clear. It was made clear during the slide, your slide, but will they all get that highest, safest, proven dose? And maybe there, and not in phase 3, maybe there's been some type of adverse events such as phosphorus increases, and some families complained. You didn't mention it because it was just cohort 5, but for the extension phase where there are more children because there's been escalation and moving from propel 2 to extension phase. So what is that about? Any adverse events such as the phosphorus increase? And is it significant or not? All children who completed phase 2 move, once they complete the phase 2 study, they are moved to, or are given the opportunity, and if they accept, they move on to the observational study. This is extension study. As for the doses, they started on the last dose that they got on the phase 2 study, but the dose could be increased based on several criteria. And once the doses are known and approved, they can be moved up to higher doses. So yes, dose escalation is open. All doses are open in the extension study. So that would be a talk between the researcher and the family for dose escalation, but as the dose was chosen for 0.25, the idea is that all children at some point go up to or down to 0.25 milligram per kilo per day. Study is long-term and extension, but it's as strict and rigorous in the assessment of safety and efficacy as phase 2 or phase 3, always looking into changes in phosphorus levels, general changes or adverse events. And we have specific rules in our studies for the decision making if it happens. We are assessing potential changes in phosphorus. Phosphorus is very interesting. It fluctuates a lot. Different children, well, individuals in general, we have different phosphorus depending on what we ate, whether we are fasting, whether we drink a lot of dairy or fish or cereal. And it has an influence on the results we get. So it's not just a one-off value, but changes also regarding phosphorus. We have not found any indication that the doses that are being used increase the risk of phosphorus increases in this population based on our results and our population, but we keep controlling it up close to draw conclusions to see the effect of infigratibnib for safety and efficacy. I think some of these questions have been answered, but is there a new recruitment for the extension phase, or is it just for children who moved from phase 2 to the OLE? Or is there also a recruitment for that extension phase? Is there a new enrollment or recruitment? Yes. The study is open to a new cohort of children coming from PROPEL, those that did not get infigratibnib before. And for those children that can come from PROPEL, could not be included in phase 3 or 2 studies for inclusion or exclusion criteria. So we are a bit more flexible so that those children can join a study and be on infigratibnib and understand how they respond. That cohort of children called naive children, so that they did not get, they were not on infigratibnib before, has been planned, but is not open yet. So we are not enrolling for that cohort yet, since the intention we've said is to be sure that all children on PROPEL have a study they can continue in. So up until that cohort is closer to being opened, we will not start enrolling. And we're also setting priorities in the way in priorities for the children that will be enrolled for phase 3, so that centers and the different members of the different groups, and I'm talking about PROPEL and PROPEL 3, but we want them to be fully focused on the children for phase 3? This is another common question. Children in phase 2 or 3, and I think you've mentioned it, but well, just let me reiterate. So those that move on to the drug phase because they are part of OLE or because they got placebo and they complete phase 3, there are two questions. If they got placebo and once they complete the double-blind randomized trial, they get the placebo, they're moved to the drug, right? Yes. And if they've been on a drug with Propel 2, Propel 3, or OLE, they get the drug up until regulatory agencies approve it. Is it insured? Or once their growth plate is closed, how does it work? Would they be part of the OLE up until they complete their growth or up until it is approved by agencies? They would stay with the study up until the end, right? Yes. Second question is, those children who are with the Propel OLE, all those children will stay on the drug until they complete their growth, not just until the drug is approved, because it has to do with efficacy and safety long term for infigratibnib, which is very important for us to assess it as part of a clinical trial setting with the children who've been on the drug for years now. That's vital information that we can get. So the idea is that they are on it up until they reach the final stature, which is another requirement of healthcare authorities that we need to prove or show if there is a change, showing that these early changes in the first years are translated in the stature of children. That's for OLE. And then phase 3, yes, all children on placebo, when they move on to OLE, are started on infigratibnib. We will not know who had placebo or not. All children coming for phase 3 into OLE go in and are started on treatment. So if they were on treatment, they will continue, and those on placebo will start treatment. But we will not know until phase 3 study is completed and we can undo the double blind. Perfect. They're talking about costs here. Well, it's not been regulated, so there's nothing to say about costs. What about Latin American children and phase 3 studies? Doesn't matter if they're from Latin America or not, but the matter is whether the country has a study or not. And this was another of my questions. One of the requirements we had for QED and other clinical trials in our experience was that, just common sense, you had to be a resident of the country where the clinical trial was developed. What about inclusion criteria? Is there a chance that they might be residents of a different country and then come for the controls according to the protocol, whether it's phase 3 or extension OLE, and then go back to your country? Or it's just the same inclusion criteria for clinical trial as it was? Well, it's not inclusion criteria regarding residency, where the site is or the researcher is. Well, There are some countries that do not allow to children from other countries to come and receive the drug, and it will depend on the country, what the study is being developed, and it will depend on the institution. So once we have the list of researchers, well, you just check it with the researcher who would be familiar with the country's regulations. So it's not inclusion criteria of the protocol itself, but it's regulation in the different countries. Also the ethics committee for the site. We get this question a lot. Can I be part of this PENIS study? And there are explicit criteria for exclusion, but some others, well, it's good to know that depends on other factors and not just the study. So placebo, you said 1 out of 2 or 2 to 1, but yes. So you've got 3 children in the study. 2 of them will be on infigratibnib and 1 will be on placebo. That's the ratio, 2 to 1. Meaning that 2 out of 3 children will be on active drug, that one that has an effect, and 1 is on placebo. There are different types of randomization to see how many children will be on active drug or placebo. And there are previous studies that were 1 to 1. So out of 2 children, 1 would be on infigratibnib and 1 would be on placebo. So half of them will get active treatment, half will get placebo. That's 1 to 1, but the 2 to 1 randomization means that 2/3 of children enrolled get the active drug and 1/3 gets placebo. So the goal was to bring down as much as possible the amount of children who will be on placebo, so that most of the children that joined the study will be on active treatment. I hope I've been clear. Yes, 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 very clear. Very, very clear. Thank you, Daniela. What about sites and hospitals in Spain? As Daniela was saying, just waiting for the process. Red tape, consents, ethic committees, waiting for it to happen. In Spain, there will be phase 3, but as she explained, the countries who'd been with phase 2, Propel 2, have an option to continue with Propel 3, and Spain or the sites agreed. So it is known that Vitoria, with Dr. De Verua in charge, then Virgen de la Vitoria Hospital in Malaga with Dr. Leiva and La Paz Hospital. I'm not sure whether the IP will be changed or not, but there is Barrera and Salcedo. Those 2 doctors are with the study as well. These are 3 centers that were not distributed out of chance, but also because the drug company thinks further and asks, how can we make sure that families can participate, and how can we cover different areas of the country so that the whole population is covered. So there's 1 up north, 1 in the center, and 1 down south. It is true that these are sites that have specialized units as it is and have a significant potential for recruitment, but they're well located geographically to make sure Well, of course, it'll never be close enough. We know that. But even though we know that it will not be a perfect fit for our needs, we try to do our best. And in Spain, I can say those are the 3 centers from Propel 1 to Propel 2 and the OLE phase, and willing and adjusting so that later this year, as you said, they can start the Propel 3 phase. I answered myself. And then Propel is active, so enrollment is active. Yes. We just need to wait for that phase where some get placebo, some get the drug. But Propel, well, you've been maybe enrolled or you're about to be enrolled if you expressed your interest. And I can say that families in Spain are pro-research and very generous, very, very generous. There's been families that not for themselves, but future generations being part of studies knowing that it wouldn't help them probably with trials that got here before QED with biomarine, that first one, and families even knowing that they would not be covered because of enrollment or recruitment. It is competitive recruitment if I reach the top number, and yet they stayed with the observational study with biomarine just for those families behind them. And families in Spain are very generous. Everything adds, of course, staying sane. That's why we are here, doing a cricket, explaining this is just one more thing we can do for children. This is not everything goes or nothing goes, but they are all pro-research. Everything adds, everything helps our children's lives. And we are so grateful, so very grateful. It is truly important so that programs can move on and that willingness so that there are studies and so that there are options. And that's why it's important that families are open and understand the importance and significance. You can get a sip of water. You've been talking for 2 hours. Well, I just wanted to thank you all for that vision and for support and research. There's this technical question. You know, sometimes data are complicated, but this dad is asking, what about those 4 centimeter average? Is on top of the growth itself? So on baseline, what we understand and know and has been studied with the observational study. So is 4 centimeters is an average on top of it? Yes, that's a change compared to the baseline growth velocity. Since we express the measurement as change in growth velocity, annualized growth velocity estimated now. So after 6 months of treatment, compared to the growth rate that the child had before being recruited. So that difference is the change in the velocity. And those are 4 centimeters, and that's the change for the children that were considered. So 10 out of 12 had an increase in growth velocity of at least 25%. If we consider all 12 children, that change would be 3.38. And for those that only got an increase of at least 25%, that's what we consider the minimum response we would like to have to be sure that the result, that the growth is drug-related. For those children, the change is 4 centimeters. Whenever we see the results, we know these are little of a few children and little time, because these are children all over the world, and it's 6 months of observation of the last dose, which is efficacious and safe. And that's what's so important, to have a phase 3 and the OLE as well, where the children will get the maximum dose. That's where you will have a sample size large enough, but we need a basis to know whether it's worth it and it's worth continuing. So again, we need to be cautious. These are data and these are studies, but yes, only a few children, few months. So this is not the final solution. That's not what we're saying. This is preliminary. And you are aware this is not a large number, even though it's a rare condition, but this is an indication so that we continue studying on the dose. Exactly. This is a thought, and I think it is important. So I insist preliminary data will be confirmed during phase 3 with more questions, more children, comparing children on treatment and those who are not on treatment. And as you were saying, the change is based on 6 months of treatment. This was the minimum amount to see growth changes. So we can assess and select the dose and move on. But these children are still in the study and will continue for a few more months until completion of the study. It's not about checking out data. This was planned for 6 months to see what dose is the best, and that's what we hope to have with phase 3. Because yes, they might say there's great growth during the first 6 months, but we don't know whether it stays or not in other months. This has not yet been looked. You might say it's 6 months, and it might be that there is an effect at the beginning of treatment that means decreasing, but we don't know whether it stays or sustained or reduced. But yeah, there's a minimum that has to be your basis to move on and see what happens. Exactly. And then growth. After 6 months, it's not the same as a whole year, but based on the data that we have from other studies or other data that we have from collagen 10, indicate that the results will be sustained and it's not the same to have an annualized or an annual growth rate. I think proportionality is even more interesting. I'm excited and looking forward to your data, since one of the features I would say is disproportionate short stature. So if the growth rate is linear but not proportionate, it will be yes, but same as with other comorbidity associated such as stenosis kyphosis or tibial bone. And I know Infigratibnib study, the QED study, is intense for whoever decides to enroll, but I guess they are examined and in an unseen level because they undergo so many tests, especially for all those data that are to be collected. It's important not to stick just to stature. It's about improving the condition. In the end, oftentimes, stature is the least of the problems throughout their lives. So if we do not think that the drug So it's about improving the condition. Otherwise, we would not be succeeding, researchers or others. It'll be interesting, both phase 3 and OLE. And then the last question, last but not least, this is a star question, which is hypochondroplasia. When? First, this study is just for achondroplasia, only achondroplasia, with a confirmed genetic test. It's not clinical, but genetic test. But next question is hypochondroplasia. We are all worried. So you had a preclinical trial, and you said that before in other talks. What can you tell us? Well, it's been shaped, as we heard before, when these data have been shared, as when we started with achondroplasia, but there were data that hypochondroplasia would be the next condition, and we will investigate the potential benefit of Infigratibnib. And we're working actively to have a program as soon as possible. And yes, we're working actively and we're planning it late or early next year. So 2024 is that the date? So late 2024. And what about the study design? It'll be the same with this observational profile, dose escalation, or with a study from ACH for some factors. Maybe you can expedite the trial so that it happens faster? Is another question we are worried about. Yes, exactly that. That's what we're working on to see how we can optimize it and making sure that hypochondroplasia can progress, can move as fast as possible. And so we are now developing and assessing different possibilities to see how to best use all the data that we have and see what can be used to justify different features and questions in our study for hypochondroplasia. Where the pathophysiology is common, it's not the same. These are two different conditions, and that's what we're trying to focus on, to separate, to focus on achondroplasia on the one hand, and then have the hypochondroplasia program move on in the best way for that specific condition. Let me say that Daniela will be in Malaga in November. We will meet soon. And let's hope you get a chance to come, not just because it's her and her team and her expertise, but because of what we said. They're always so open and you will get a chance to talk to them. And after listening to this information, which is a lot, and when we log out and process the information, that's fine, because you know that Daniela and her team will be available. We're excited that they are with us. They will be in Malaga. They will give a talk and they will share time with us, which is also good for them. I think there's just one very last question about recruitment age, the minimum age and maximum age, if you know it, for the recruitment. There might be families thinking now, well, maybe now, in this current situation where I might consider a study, is it possible? Is it not? Will I talk to the researchers? So that would be it. Yes, sure. Age, okay. So we covered children. Minimum age would be same as with the phase 2, that is 3 years minimum to be started on treatment, and oldest, well, that depends. They can be up to, well, under 18 years of age. The only condition is that they have potential for growth as defined in the study, which will also be detailed in what we will publish. But the idea is for those children that join the study, they will join knowing they will be part of a clinical trial. And as you said, it means treatment and exams. So there's a lot that children and families do to participate, and we need to make sure that children that come in will have the potential to get benefit out of it. So it means that they still have a potential for growth and have a potential to be responders, to change their so-called growth trajectory. They can change it. They have the potential to change it if they get Infigratibnib. And so that type of criteria is very important. So it's not so much about the age. It's about making sure that the child has a chance to grow. Yes, yes. Recruitment, well, or being enrolled is a commitment. Yeah, the researcher needs to make sure that everything is available for the child and the family, and the drug company ensure that the researcher can offer the best potential or the best options possible, but then the family, and we insist all the time. We talk to researchers and tell them, you need to be clear when you explain from the beginning what a clinical trial is about, number of visits, frequency, how often those visits, what tests. Some are invasive, some are not. But they need to have the information once they get the consent to be signed. Families need to know what it is and what it means to be part of a clinical trial, so that we ensure that it's truly a success. First for the research and for their child, but then when a family participates but doesn't comply, it's actually taking the place of someone else who might have participated but cannot be enrolled. It's competitive, recruitment is closed, and so that's why it's so important for the researcher. And actually, you drug companies have a responsibility there to those pieces of information, just demanding and making sure that researchers explain to families what it means to be part of a clinical trial. It isn't easy. It's gratifying for your child and for those that will come, as we said before, but it takes effort and sacrifice. And so researchers need to be very clear, as well as drug companies. So this is homework for everyone. You know what we're like. Exactly. There are a few more questions, but we won't take any more or your time, take up any more of your time, especially because you will be seen in November. Yes, I love it. I love it that I get to participate in November. It is a pleasure, as always, to be part of your meetings, getting a chance to talk to families and experts, learn from everyone. So important to us. You know, ALPI conferences are much more than knowledge. Well, this is a national conference, not the international one we had last year. It's just a day and a half, but there are so many people registered. So we are thrilled to know that so many people are coming, the families trust us, trust the foundation, and that we can offer them what they deserve. Knowledge is important, being up to date is important, and that's why it is appreciated that researchers and clinicians are there, as well as teachers, because schools are so important, and then psychologists and therapists. It all means so much. So we need to offer as much as we can, and I think the conferences are good. Joint effort, and it's 2 days where we live together, which is important, where we exchange experiences, good moments, bad moments, doubts, and party as well. Party, we enjoy our parties, and that's important in our lives. That's always important. And so I think that's what's important, to have those conferences. It takes a lot of effort, but then with all the comments we get after our conference, even if we end up exhausted, that's when we realize how it is worth it. The next one and the next one and the next one. And you know, because you've been there every year, so there's nothing else I can add. But I take the opportunity to thank you for your attendance at the conference, and also for your talk today, the presentation, and the chance we got to help families ask questions. It's not always all we want, but I think we're all clear about it. Thank you very much, Daniela, to you and your team. Thank you for the opportunity. See you soon. It's been a pleasure. Thank you very much. Thank you, everyone. Thank you. See you next time and at the conference around the corner.